There is so much happening right now, and I can't think of a better guest to help analyze it all than the legendary Allie B. Stuckey. Allie Stuckey is one of the most important Christian voices out there, especially for Christian women. She is the author of Toxic Empathy and host of Relatable with Allie B. Stuckey. Allie, yesterday, a transgender gunman targeted Christians that were celebrating Mass and praying for a new school year. This is obviously an anti-Christian terror attack, in addition to being yet another violent, murderous outburst by a transgender individual. How did we get here? And what is your analysis of this yet repeated attack against Christianity?
Gosh, it's so disturbing, all of these details, that they weren't just Christians who were targeted, but specifically Christian children. Of course, that is the same pattern that we saw in Nashville just a couple of years ago. Someone who thinks that they're born in the wrong body, specifically targeting children who are praying, worshiping, learning about God. And of course, this particular killer, it looks like, had that explicit motivation with the words written in his journal, on his gun, and things like that. So obviously, this is demonic. There is some sort of demonic oppression and demonic possession perhaps going on. Some of this person's drawings that were published actually depicted him communicating with Satan or a demon or something like that. So if people doubted spiritual warfare before this, they shouldn't now. Good and evil, darkness and light actually exist. There is a war waging for the human soul, and a war waging specifically that targets children.
Yeah, that's well said, and that is exactly right. And it's interesting because so many pastors, when George Floyd overdosed in Minneapolis in May of 2020, they, for months, some weeks, they talked about how we're racist and we need to apologize for being racist in Minneapolis, mind you. And I wonder how many pastors this Sunday are going to speak out against the toxin of transgenderism. More innocent children have been harmed by the trans lobby than by racist police. Let's put 461 up on screen. This is a picture of, obviously this guy's completely deranged. He's totally insane. So I don't want to read too much into his imagery, but that looks like he's communicating with a demon or some sort of satanic spirit there. Allie, why is it that the church is refusing to speak out against what is now a public safety risk, which is the transgender community in this country?
Gosh, that's such a good and sad comparison, what you just said. We had so many pastors who would have called themselves, conservative evangelicals, who after George Floyd's death blamed all white people because of the alleged actions of one person. Mm-hmm. And yet, when it comes to someone who identifies as the opposite sex, of course, we see the mayor of Minneapolis saying this has nothing to do with transgenderism. This doesn't have to do with the quote unquote trans community. And unfortunately, we're probably going to see that vagueness from a lot of pastors who call themselves Christians. But really, they should have been talking about this a long time ago. All Christians, especially pastors from the pulpit, should be on the front lines about this, because primarily this is not political. Primarily this is theological. In fact, it goes back to the very first chapter of the first book of the Bible. So if you are a pastor who says, I don't want to get political, I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to get biblical. And if you just preach the first 27 verses of the Bible, you will get to the controversial statement that all people are made in God's image as male or female. That is fundamentally theological. And if you are missing that, it's not because you're scared to be political. It's because you're scared to be biblical. And if that's the case, you have no place behind a pulpit.
That's right. A lot of these pastors need to resign in disgrace. And in the audience right now, if you're going to one of those churches and you are tithing to one of those pastors, you got to disconnect. This Sunday should be a test. Will your pastor speak out against the transgender threat in our country? And if they spoke out against George Floyd, more people died actually in this situation than in George Floyd. They were attacking little kids at mass. And this wasn't a quote unquote MAGA white supremacist. Now, 440, let's put 459 up on screen. This is Minneapolis school shooter Robin Westman. I hate saying the name. I shouldn't have done that. Confessed that he was tired of being trans. Quote, I wish I never brainwashed myself. Yeah, the name should be Robert, not Robin. Again, their whole other thing that you and I could explore for about 20 minutes here at Allie is that the media and the journalists are getting really mad that people are misgendering the shooter. Forget that 2 kids are dead. They're getting upset that this demonic mass murderer might have a wrong gendering. But I do want to play this piece of tape here. It's so telling. This is the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Free. And if this shooter would have been a Trump-supporting, MAGA hat wearing, they would have cared about his identity. But now that it was a trans person, they say, how dare you make it about their identity, even though this is a pattern of trans violence around the country. Play cut 423.
I have heard about a whole lot of hate that's being directed at our trans community. Anybody who is using this as an opportunity to villainize our trans community or any other community out there has lost their sense of common humanity. We should not be operating out of a place of hate for anyone. We should be operating from a place of love for our kids.
Right, and you're the one that defunded the police, or your entire cabal defunded the police after George Floyd. Allie, Stuckey, your reaction?
Yeah, he said the same thing on CNN with Aaron Burnett, I think it was. And then he, as an aside, kind of parenthetically said, including Catholic people, including the Catholic kids, as if they are just kind of a peripheral part of this story. No, it's the Christians who are targeted. And he is showing more compassion, what I call toxic empathy, for the perpetrator of this crime, because he happens to be identified as what they consider, a marginalized, oppressed group, than he is for the very kids who are being killed. Yes, the specific mental derangement that a killer has is absolutely relevant to the conversation when we're talking about stopping crime, especially when we see a pattern. If we see a pattern of any kind of person that is targeting another kind of person, in this case, a so-called trans person targeting Christian kids, then I think a smart person might ask, why does this keep happening and how can we stop it? One way to stop it is stop calling a man she, because you are perpetuating the very delusion that is driving this kind of evil ideology that ends itself in chaos and death.
And that is toxic empathy. Talk a little bit more about that. I mean, you wrote a whole book about it. Shouldn't Christians be the leaders of correcting this in the culture, not the ones affirming the delusion that leads to 2 dead kids at a Catholic mass?
Yes, empathy becomes toxic when it leads you to do 3 things: affirm sin, validate lies, or support destructive policy. Empathy by itself, neutral, could lead you towards kindness, but it can also lead you towards cruelty if it is leading you to affirm and validate and support things that are destructive and evil and sinful. And that's exactly what has happened here, because people feel so deeply for others. They have allowed that feeling to drive them to affirm things that are bad for not only that individual, but also the victims on the other side of the moral equation, also society at large. This is true when it comes to immigration. It's true when it comes to social justice, gender, sexuality, abortion, climate. On all of these different issues, Christian compassion is perverted and weaponized against people in order to convince them that the only moral and compassionate position is the progressive one. But love and empathy are not synonymous. Love, as we read in 1 Corinthians 13:6, is interwoven with the truth. So you can't have true love without, which means that Christians are called to something much better and deeper than toxic empathy.
Yeah, Toxic Empathy is a phenomenal book. Allie, stay right there. Allie, I want you to do the talking for me next segment, because everyone's really mad at me that I said something biblical about marriage, and apparently a man is not allowed to quote scripture. And it's not just once, it's repeated in the scripture. So I want you, as a thought leader in the Christian space, to make my argument for me.
For full shows, live and on demand, it's Salem News Channel.